Hi, my name is Ave Mullen, and I'm a senior communications major at AIC, and this is my essay for my African American literature class titled Different Attitudes Towards Passing. Nella Larsen's Passing is a mind-opening novel that reveals the underlying issues of race, gender, and sexuality in America. The story begins with Irene Redfield, an African American woman whose skin is light enough to pass as white. She uses this to her advantage to be able to enjoy nicer restaurants, bars, and hotels that were meant for white people only. In the course of her life, she is reacquainted with old friends Claire Kendry and Gertrude Martin. Claire and Gertrude are able to pass just like Irene. However, they weren't only passing in public places and for enjoyment, but passing for social acceptance and survival to close friends and family. In the end of the novel, Claire Kendry dies, and it is unclear if her death is at the hands of Irene Redfield or her own. Over the years, the idea of passing has had a tremendous effect on the social movements and conversations surrounding African Americans, women, and the LGBTQ plus communities, continuing to evolve and redefine itself. Irene, Claire, and Gertrude's attitude towards passing each show the relationship between the desires and circumstances of the African American community in the early 1900s. Irene Redfield is the protagonist of the novel. Even though she doesn't really like the idea of passing, she still partakes in it if she wants to enjoy a nicer restaurant or bar. Irene doesn't pass because she is ashamed of her race. She passes to improve the quality of her life. Irene uses passing as a temporary escape from the oppression she faces as an African American. She has two sons, Junior and Theodore, and a husband, Brian, whose skin isn't light enough to pass for white. Because of this, Irene wouldn't be able to pass while she is with her family or to her close friends. While visiting Claire Kendry's house, another African American woman, an old friend named Gertrude Martin, was there. She expresses her opinion that no one would want a dark child. Irene feels anger and resentment towards this comment because it brings her to the realization that her sons and husbands don't have this opportunity to improve their quality of life and temporarily escape their oppression. And she feels like she's betraying her family whenever she is passing. When Claire's racist husband comes home, Irene is confronted with the harmful risk of passing, and she has pity towards Claire for allowing herself to be in this situation. However, Irene disapproves of passing while condoning it and also seems fascinated because she chooses to stay in contact with Claire Kendry and allows Claire to constantly involve herself in Irene's personal life, regardless of her own contempt for the situation. Gertrude Martin's attitude towards passing is for comfort and stability. Her husband, Fred, is white and knows all about her African descent. Together, they have two children, twin boys, who are also light enough to pass for white. While speaking to the girls at Claire Kendry's house, Gertrude expresses how she wouldn't have more children because of her fear of it coming out dark-skinned. If Gertrude were to have a dark child, it would put her whole family at risk of being ridiculed or even harmed. For Gertrude, it was easier for them to pretend to be a white family rather than to be an interracial one. Gertrude's approach to passing is more focused towards social acceptance than self-acceptance. While talking with Irene after leaving Claire Kendry's house, after the racist encounter with Claire's husband, Gertrude expresses how she does not agree with Claire deceiving her husband and how dangerous it could turn out and put them all at risk. Even though Gertrude doesn't want to be seen as African American, she was still offended by Jack's comments because she still identifies with her race. Gertrude is more worried about how she is going to be treated instead of how she's going to be seen. She doesn't want her sons to face the harsh treatment of being African American, and because her husband is white, she might not ever have to reveal that fact to them. Gertrude passes in order to keep her family safe and comfortable and doesn't partake in anything that might be a risk to that, especially Claire Kendry. Claire Kendry's attitude towards passing is completely oblivious. Claire chooses to pass as white all the time and to her close friends and relatives. She is able to do this because the only living relatives she's had after her father died were her estranged white aunts, Grace and Etna, who are heavily religious. They forced Claire to forget and be ashamed of her African American identity at a young age. When Claire was old enough, she ran away and married a white man to whom she never revealed her African descent. Claire passed as white out of fear and survival. Not passing or assimilating into a white society could have been fatal in Claire's situation because she had no one there to protect her if she affirmed her true identity. This goes to show how separated society was at that time. By the time Claire was old enough to make decisions for herself, she realized that in order to have better opportunities for herself, she would need to continue to pass for white. Claire had been passing for a very long time and began to feel trapped and lonely in her life, which is what made her reach out to Irene. Claire admired Irene for staying true to her roots. As Claire continues to get older, her white husband can notice her skin getting a little darker. This makes Claire feel more self-conscious about her race and forces her to confront her situation head-on by making a decision about how she wants to live her life and how she'll raise her daughter, Marjorie. Irene, Claire, and Gertrude all agreed with passing to some degree. They all have an obligation to their family, which is why Irene can't pass and why Gertrude must pass. Claire's obligation to her family is what makes her want to stop passing because she has no real friends or family and she feels lonely. She wants to create a better life for her daughter, Marjorie. The social advantages of passing is why all the ladies partake in it as well. They get to enjoy access to nicer places and events. In the end, Claire dies, and it is unclear if it's at the hand of Irene or Claire herself. Both endings offer a different analysis of how passing affects the quality of life for African Americans. If Claire actually took her own life, it shows how fearful and stuck Claire felt in her situation. When her husband Jack found out that she was an African American, she feared her and her daughter's life would be in so much danger and death was her only way out. It also may show how deeply ashamed she was of being African American and how she would rather die than live as an African American. If Irene pushed Claire to her death, it shows how much Irene hated Claire, despite all of her efforts to be close friends. It shows how Irene did not want to accept Claire into the African American community and couldn't even reflect how Irene was envious of Claire's ability to live double lives. All in all, the concept of passing discourages the diversity that makes a society strong out of fear of the unknown. They get to enjoy access to nicer places and events, and they are treated better in public and have better opportunities. However, they all face harsh realities for passing. Irene is constantly on an emotional roller coaster when it comes to passing, and she feels deep regret for not being able to share a better life experience with her family. Gertrude will go as far as to deprive herself of more children and lives in fear of the future. Claire is in a harmful situation with no easy way out and struggles with her own identity. Passing has more negative consequences in the long run than it does positive effects in the short term.